Good morning, everyone. Hi, I'm State Senator Liz Krueger from District 28 in Manhattan. I'm delighted that you can all be with us today. We're introducing a bill that I have worked on with advocates, legal, medical, and social science experts, and we're announcing the introduction of our new bill to strengthen regulations on commercial surrogacy and gamete donation. In 2021, the Child Parent Security Act, or CPSA, legalized gestational surrogacy in New York. It created a legal framework under which intended parents could petition the court for a judgment of parentage for children conceived through assisted reproduction and for children born through surrogacy, and become the legal parents immediately after the birth of the child. The CPSA also established regulation of gestational surrogacy, surrogacy agreements, surrogacy programs, and assisted reproduction service providers, and importantly, created a Surrogates Bill of Rights. These measures took a step forward, providing the regulation and protections that are necessary, but in my opinion, did not go far enough. Assisted reproductive technology, or ART, has been rapidly advancing and expanding. It has become a lucrative industry due in part to increasing rates of infertility and the high cost of ART services. There is limited regulation of agencies and clinics that provide egg and sperm donation services. And in my opinion, there are inadequate protections for egg and sperm donors, intended parents, and donor-conceived people. Agencies seek to recruit young people for egg and sperm donation who are generally in need of money, may be vulnerable, and may not understand the risks or their rights. Intended parents who use donor gametes to build their families may receive inaccurate information or be subject to unfair practices. Donor-conceived people struggle to access information about their origins and the need to obtain essential medical information that may be needed to help evaluate their own healthcare concerns as they grow up and age. For many years, I've advocated for women's rights, family formation, and safe and fair practices. As I became aware of more people experiencing infertility issues and turning to ART for help with building their families, I was struck by the medical advancements, but I also heard about health complications experienced from fertility medications. While working on this bill, I have engaged in many conversations that have further illuminated the risks involved with entering into surrogacy and gamete donation arrangements for all participants, including the children born from these arrangements. The purpose of this legislation is to help make sure that surrogacy and gamete donation arrangements work and are fair for everyone involved, for the egg and sperm donors who provide their gametes, for gestational surrogates who undergo surrogate pregnancies, for the intended parents who use ART to build their families, and for the children born from all these kinds of arrangements. You will hear additional details about the bill from the advocates and experts who have joined me today. With that, I would like to introduce Dr. Wendy Chafkin, Professor Emeritus of Public Health and Obstetrics Gynecology at Columbia University Medical Center. By the way, we will handle questions from members of the press after all the speakers present. So I'm going to turn it over to Wendy. Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you, Senator Krueger, for this bill and for all your work. This bill is important and novel as it aims to protect the health and rights of all participants in commercial gestational surrogacy and gamete donation agreements, those who act as surrogates, egg and sperm donors, donor-conceived people, people born through surrogacy, and the intended parents. I'm going to lay out the provisions that address the health of each group, and Yasmin Ergis will do the same for the legal and rights issues. The previous bill that passed and the Hoylman-Siegel proposal do not adequately safeguard the health of all involved. These are the key ways the Krueger bill strengthens health protections. It mandates fully informed consent. Donors and surrogates take medical risks without receiving direct medical benefits and receive financial incentives which may interfere with their ability to assess the risks carefully. Yet both involve medical risks, as we've seen from those who've experienced health complications from the medications or surgical procedures involved. However, many considering acting as an egg donor or surrogate are not aware of these risks, may not receive sufficient information, and may assume that the dose of medication or the procedure offered by their physician is the one that is the best and safest for them. However, the physician may be acting on behalf of the intended parent, whose interests may differ. Importantly, this bill establishes an informed consent process for all the participants, which includes an explanation of all procedures, the known and unknown long-term health impacts on the participants and on the future children. The process allows each participant to ask questions and document that they understand the information before consenting to proceed. The bill guarantees that both sperm and egg providers are entitled to receive copies of their medical records related to eligibility screening, doses of drugs used, numbers of eggs obtained in each cycle, as well as what happens to their eggs and sperm. The bill further ensures that donor-conceived and surrogate-born children have access to both personal identity and health history information. Decades of adoption research have documented that there are important mental health consequences of not knowing one's biological origins, and it is obviously important to know one's family medical history. The child, upon attaining adulthood, has the right to obtain their original birth certificate, including the name of the surrogate and the name or identification number of any gamete donors. They have the right to medical history information regarding any identified gamete donors and people who acted as surrogates. In order to bolster medical protections for all, the bill strengthens the health protections for the surrogates and the children they give birth to by specifying that they must have medical clearance, meaning that they cannot meet any of ACOG's criteria for high-risk pregnancies and can only have had a limited number of previous pregnancies. The physicians must observe ACOG guidelines for best medical practices, which include recommending the transfer of only one embryo to reduce the risk of twins or triplets, and cesarean section only when medically indicated. The bill requires clinicians to follow best medical practices to protect the health of egg donors and donor-conceived children, including that the donors have known risks for complications and the use of conservative, low stimulation medication protocols to prevent the donors from producing so many eggs that they develop ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, a potentially dangerous complication. All medical screening and services must be provided by New York State licensed clinicians. The bill establishes a registry and requires egg donors, surrogates, and intended parents to participate. Anonymized information will be available for public health monitoring and to limit the number of offspring born of a particular donor in New York State. The medical protections for surrogates and egg donors will also help to protect the health of the children born of these arrangements. Although the intended parents may not themselves undergo medical interventions, they certainly have an interest in the health of their future children. Moreover, their own mental health will be supported, knowing that their efforts to attain parenthood have not harmed any of those who have helped them do so. In our eagerness to embrace more expansive possibilities for family formation, we must not lose sight of the state's obligation to protect the health and medical well-being of all involved. This bill supports those protections. Thanks.
You're muted, Senator.
Oh, yes, being not on mute helps. Thank you very much, Dr. Chafkin. And I'd like to introduce Yasmin Ergis, Director of Gender and Public Policy Specialization at the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University. Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you very much. And I'm delighted to be participating today. I'm delighted that this bill is being presented. More and more people are turning to assisted reproduction, gamete donation, and surrogacy to establish their families. As Senator Krueger mentioned, the legislation that was passed a few years ago helped to provide a framework within which they could do so. But notable problems remain, and the current law does not sufficiently ensure the rights and protections of all the parties to these agreements. That is what this bill will do. It will do so by establishing a Children's Bill of Rights and a Gamete Donors Bill of Rights, strengthening the protections that are already provided by the Surrogates Bill of Rights, and providing better support for intended parents, including by establishing a special enrollment period that can facilitate their timely purchase of egg donors and surrogates health coverage. All the parties will benefit. So let's start where we should always start, and that is with the children. For them, the most vital group who need to be secure in their identities and in their ability to attain the highest possible level of health. The Bill of Rights and other provisions guarantee that they will have essential information regarding their biological parentage and their health status. Non-identified gamete donation will no longer be permitted, in particular as of 2026, reducing possible pressures on donors and surrogates. We have long known, as my colleague Dr. Chafkin mentioned, the essential medical function of information regarding parentage. Children born of gamete donation have also told us how essential such information is for their psychological well-being. Intended parents will know when they enter into agreements exactly what provisions govern donors and surrogates' identity disclosures. So the playing field will be very clear. Then the gamete donors. Finally, there will be some guardrails on ovarian stimulation, egg retrieval, and the conditions under which they occur. More generally, for both egg and sperm donors, there will be health checks, clear rules regarding identity disclosure, and more transparency in their dealings with egg and sperm banks. The Surrogates Bill of Rights will be strengthened, as will be the guarantees with respect to surrogacy agreements that a surrogate so that a surrogate retains the same rights as any other pregnant person in New York. For instance, agreements may no longer include non-disclosure clauses, nor may they wrest from the surrogate control over their behavioral decisions. But none of the provisions written into law mean much if compliance cannot be assured. This is something that lawyers know very well, lawyers such as me. How can you enforce agreements against people who are not present in the state? How can a surrogate who is absent from the state be assured access to the quality of care that our legislation provides? The bill strengthens residency requirements for intended parents and for surrogates, precisely to mitigate risks of noncompliance, to ensure that any disputes that arise may be adjudicated fairly and in a timely fashion, and to ensure that the surrogates can indeed access the benefits to which they are entitled. Finally, the bill strengthens informed consent to the benefit of all the parties. In this regard, it sets parameters on service providers' advertising and informational materials to promote transparency and requires that specific topics be covered during the informed consent procedures. There are many other provisions to the bill, but let me conclude by saying that the establishment of a central assisted reproduction registry and the fact that it directs the health commissioner to promulgate regulations for the collection of anonymized clinical and demographic information is essential for research. This bill will finally ensure that we have the information that is vital to public policy and public health. The New York State Constitution defines, and I quote, "the protection and promotion of the health of the inhabitants of the state as matters of public concern." This bill heeds that call. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yasmin. I appreciate it. And again, I think what Wendy and Yasmin are both highlighting, of course, is the fact that these are all relatively new issues for us as humans and our society, and our culture and our healthcare. And so we need to be thinking broadly about the impacts from a big picture perspective, because every year there's going to be a growing number of people who are brought into the world under these arrangements, and we need to pre-think the issues before they start to happen at a bigger level. With that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Laura Briggs, Professor of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. Good morning, Laura.
Good morning. Thank you, Senator Krueger. I'm happy to be here. I am a scholar of adoption and also a lesbian parent of a donor-conceived kid. And so, like a lot of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and trans people, I have an investment in this bill. LGBT people have a long history of losing our children to divorce and to foster care because of discrimination, which makes everything about contracts involving our children more fraught. And so we particularly have concerns that are addressed by this bill. We want strong legal protections for gamete donors and surrogates, because that means strong protections for ourselves and our kids as well. We are often parents of donor-conceived and surrogate-carried children, and as such, we have lifelong connections to donors and to people who work as surrogates. We want the best for them, and we also want to know that they were not harmed in the creation of our children. We also want health information for our kids, should they, God forbid, become ill and need medical information that they can use to address their own health. As anonymous donation becomes less and less feasible because of commercial DNA databases like 23andMe, and they compile larger and larger databases of information about people in the world, our children are particularly likely to be able to discover supposedly anonymized information. And so the provision in the bill that does away with anonymized donation helps ensure that if our children should want to reach out to a donor, to an egg donor or a sperm donor, that we know that they won't shock anybody, that they won't have some bad, ugly experience. And finally, we want strong health and legal protections for gamete donors, because we as gay and lesbian people are also them. We are also surrogates and gamete donors, and we want the best protections available, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it protects the LGBT community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura. I appreciate your joining us, and see how easy it is for you to bop in from Massachusetts now that we do these by Zoom instead of expecting you to show up somewhere. So thank you, thank you. Our next speaker is Liz Shire, who is a media liaison with an organization, We Are Egg Donors. So good morning, Liz, and thank you for being here to represent the concerns of egg donors.
Thank you so much, Senator Krueger. I'm very happy to be here and appreciate the opportunity to speak to everyone today about the experiences of egg donors and how this bill will help. As the Senator mentioned, I'm a 3-time egg donor. I donated 3 times in my mid-20s when a family emergency led me to need funds beyond my job. And I'm the media liaison and sit on the leadership team of We Are Egg Donors, which is a support group for current and former donors across the globe. There are about 2,000 donors in the group. This bill does a lot of wonderful things, but from my perspective, the most important part for egg donors is informed consent. Informed consent so far has been, I would say, somewhat of a misnomer for egg donors. Part of what you need to remember about this particular cohort is that they are definitionally young. While there are, in rare cases, donors accepted up to the age of 32, usually in a known, say, sister-to-sister situation, the majority of donors who are recruited out of college or shortly thereafter. Many of them are still teenagers. And so the need to make a lot of these issues clear is particularly important. One point that I want to make very loud and clear is that there has never to date been a long-term longitudinal study of donor health. We do not know what the long-term impact of egg donation is. And what virtually every donor hears upon going in for her surgery from the doctor is there are no known long-term risks of egg donation. And that is true on the face of it only because nobody has ever looked. We do not know the answer. We are being given information based on studies of infertile women, often literally twice our age, who are undergoing own-egg IVF, and it is never appropriate to extrapolate medical information from one demographic cohort to another, but that is precisely what's being done here. We also know that we're being given inaccurate information on the prevalence of OHSS, ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. The number we are given is that it occurs in 1% of cases. No one to date has been able to figure out where this number comes from. We know from our cohort that it is much higher than that. Some of the other issues that this bill will address are the issues, for example, of anonymous donation. It is rare that egg donors want to be completely anonymous. The great majority wish to be known entirely. Some wish only to give medical information. I have never yet met a donor who does not at the very least want to know how many genetic children she has in the world. This is information that is currently kept from us. I want to hit a little harder on a point that was made earlier about the availability of records. There is a specific carve-out in HIPAA for gamete donors, so our records are kept from us. We do not have any right to them. When I finally requested mine years later, I was given a very significantly redacted version that left out a lot of important information, including, among other things, the results of the genetic testing that I had done with the clinic, which became extremely important when I was having my own children. One more very key part of this bill that I find particularly important is about the lawyers. Currently, this is not the case when I was donating. I didn't even have a contract when I was donating, but donors now are often asked to share a lawyer with the recipients, which, as we all know, is not ethical. There is no other situation I know of in which both sides of a party are represented by the same lawyer. And in fact, in many cases, we are seeing that the contract specifically stipulates that in the case of a conflict, the recipient's needs will prevail. We are also seeing that donors are being offered things in these contracts that are not remotely enforceable. Contact with the children, for example, not allowing embryos to be donated onwards, things that no judge would uphold, but donors are entering into these agreements under the understanding that these things will be done. So I am so thrilled to see these issues being raised out in the world. I think this is not very well known, and I very much appreciate Senator Krueger's work in helping bring these forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liz. And we've learned so much by having the opportunity to speak to other women like you who have been egg donors. So appreciate the work of your organization. Next, we're being joined by Sarah Lamb, who is a documentary filmmaker, but also a donor-conceived adult. Good morning, Sarah.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you so much, Senator Krueger. And I just want to start by naming how emotional it is to be recognized as a group of people. I think it gets lost a lot that donor-conceived babies turn into donor-conceived adults, and it's really wonderful to have us as a group be recognized as people who have rights. I found out when I was 29 years old that I was conceived by a sperm donor. And through the course of screening the documentary film I made about looking for my biological origins, I've had the opportunity to meet with donors, donor-conceived people, parents of donor-conceived children. And in general, what I want to say is that it is so important to recognize that the relationships between donors and surrogates and intended family and offspring matter. It matters greatly that everyone is treated with respect and is informed, prepared, and empowered. And I believe that Senator Krueger's bill adds some really important oversight to what has essentially been underregulated and underexamined territory. So it's really hard to explain to a quote unquote regular person the feeling of not having the full understanding of where you come from. Most people want to shrug off this kind of dislocation, and they say things like, aren't you glad that you exist? But your parents really loved you. What's the big deal? Our imagination and sympathy can extend to people who are adopted. We know sort of instinctively not to say these kinds of things to them, but so far our imagination has yet to totally reckon with the psychological health and well-being of donor-conceived people. When I found out that I was donor conceived, I went on a multi-year search to find my donor. And there are thousands of people out there like me doing this exact thing right now. There are search angels, there are Facebook groups, there are people who are joining forces who come from the same clinic who are trying to piece together clues so that they can find out their identities. This is a very, very strong kind of drive that people feel. I was very lucky. I met my donor. I came to understand the parts of myself that are connected to him. I'm forewarned about the family high blood pressure that runs in his family. He was very welcoming, and this was great. But I have friends with more complicated stories. I have a friend right now who has 61 half siblings. All of them are in the same geographic area. They're spread out over the course of 11 years. And he knows of at least 2 of them who attended neighboring high schools. So you can imagine they were like one football game away from meeting one another. And you know, one generation down, two families in the 6th grade who shared the same donor, and they've recently discovered it. So the fear of intermingling is not exaggerated. It's a very real one. We relate to the issue of being donor conceived differently throughout our lives. It's one thing when we're children, it's another when we're teens, when we're planning our own families, when we're looking back over our lives. And the same is true for donors. My donor told me, for example, that when he donated in medical school, he had thought what he was doing was just scientific. He was just making a little bit of extra money. But now in his 70s, he realizes that he was doing something very profound. And he wished that somebody had told him that at the time. He might have spent a moment reflecting on what it would mean, not just to himself, but to other members of his family. So I'm really glad that Senator Krueger's bill provides for informed consent to gamete donors. It's important that they visualize the lifelong relationship they'll have to the decision that they're making. And the fact that the bill places a limit on the number of children born by the same gamete donor is important. And it is so important to me that the bill ensures that donor-conceived people can access an original birth certificate that reflects our genetic kinships. This helps us make sense of our stories and know and honor where we come from. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I think you articulated so well from the perspective of an adult who is here with us because of a system we have in place, but a system that leads us to believe we need better laws and regulations in your best interests and everyone else's best interests. With that, I would like to thank all of our amazing presenters, and I'm now going to open it up to questions from the press. If you are from the press and you have a question, please let us know by using the raised hand function at the bottom of the screen, or by placing your question in the Q&A section. My staffer, Justin, will call on you to unmute yourself or will read off your question. And please state your name and the name of your outlet. And hopefully we will have time to get to everyone's questions, but we also understand this bill is very complicated and it has lots and lots of pieces. So there may be more questions people have after they've had a chance to review all the materials that we are making available to you. And we will try to make sure that both myself, my staff, and our presenters are match made with you if in fact your questions come up either later in the day or later in the week. Again, we understand this is a complicated bill that touches on many different issues. But I think as you've now heard, there are very important reasons we should be going down this road, not just here in New York State, but perhaps around the world. And just FYI, there are many different countries and many different states looking at assorted pieces of exactly these issues. It's not unique to New York, but we pride ourselves in New York in trying to be out there with progressive legislation that addresses the complicated world we live in. So Justin, any questions so far?
Yes, we have a question from Kate Lisa at Spectrum. Kate, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes, good morning, Senator and everyone. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. So I was curious about, since this is building on the Child Parent Security Act from 2021, were these things discussed at the time when that legislation was being considered? Why wasn't it done then? And how has this come about of you know what needs to happen?
So some of the issues were discussed at that time. Credit to Senator Hoylman, who made a number of changes in his original bill based on concerns many people in this group brought to him. But ultimately, that was a bill I could not vote for when it came to the floor because I did not feel it did go far enough or cover enough territory. And since that time, I've been working with a broader group, as you see, of experts and specialists who have brought other issues to the fore. So we really sat down and attempted to write a bill that is both complementary to the existing law in many sections, but broaches whole new territories that were not touched at all in the original bill.
Do you have a follow-up question, Kate?
Only if anyone else would want to add into that. And thank you so much, Senator, for explaining that.
Thank you.
So
But yeah, did anyone? Oh, sorry.
I
Yeah.
would like to say something about that, which is just that in the United States, we seem to, by and large, have accepted that surrogacy is non-controversial and somehow something about technology and something good about having children. But in the context of Europe and much of the rest of the world, it is the most controversial subject there is. And so the idea that we could pass a bill in New York or anywhere else without a great deal of discussion, controversy, continued conversation is surprising. And I think that Senator Krueger's bill is an appropriate follow-up to the fact that surrogacy is immensely complicated. And in much of Europe, it is thought of in terms of eugenics and is outlawed.
Thank you.
All right, we have a question in the Q&A from Megan Saliashvili, who's a freelance reporter. She asked, do we know what kind of support for this bill exists in the state Senate and who is opposing it and why?
So we've introduced this bill, I believe, yesterday. Dawn, is that correct? We finally got introed yesterday. So I doubt very much anybody has yet voiced any support or opposition. Perhaps after this press conference and you all start to write about it, people will take a look at the bill and the memo and we will get some support. That's clearly one of our intents with announcing the introduction of the bill. We want to hear from people who support it, who have questions about it, and also who oppose it and why. That's how you get legislation successfully moved through 2 houses of a legislature and signed by the governor. But I am not aware of any legislators speaking out one way or the other at this moment. Justin, I also just want to highlight, we something in Q&A. Diane Tober, who's a well-respected researcher on egg donor issues and complications, is also joined with us. And so I want to thank her. She says if anyone has any questions about the research she has done, they can feel free to reach out to her and we can matchmake there. So Diane, thank you for being here listening.
But I'm not seeing any more questions from the press.
All right. Again, then I appreciate everyone.
Sorry, Senator, actually, just one just came in.
Okay.
To follow up on the question about pushback, this is a complex bill. Should it be done in the budget or separately?
Oh, I don't believe this is a kind of bill that would realistically fit into the budget or need to be in the budget. Even though we are known in Albany for throwing major policy issues into the budget as the finance chair, if in my other hat, I'll say that this kind of bill, which is very related to healthcare and legal ethics and constitutionality and human rights, is not the kind of bill that should be given the short shrift of thrown into a separate budget bill that might be a couple thousand pages of detailed budget issues. So no, I would, as both the lead sponsor here in the Senate and as the finance chair, I would argue against this being considered that way.
All right, there are no more questions from the press.
All right, well, with that, then I am going to thank everyone for being here today. I really appreciate all the help I've been getting with working on this bill and drafting it from so many experts around the country, as you've seen just a sample of here today on this press conference. Their expertise has been critical in helping me draft such a complex and important bill. And again, if anyone has additional questions about the legislation, please follow up with my office. We will try to get you the answers as quickly as possible. Again, special thank you to Dr. Wendy Chafkin, Yasmin Ergas, Dr. Laura Briggs, Liz Shire, and Sarah Lamb for all being with us here today, and also for the work they're each doing on these critical issues. And my office will follow up with a press release that has more detailed information about the bill provisions. And I think there was at least one question about how you get a hold of the actual bill. And we can also give the references to that for everyone who's with us. It's a frighteningly long bill. I don't know that you want to pour through over 100 pages of text, but you are more than welcome to. Again, thank you all for participating with us today. Have a good rest of the day. Bye.